U.S. versus Colombia. They end up winning 3-0. But as we talk about this and we look at this game, I want to look at the starting lineups, our predictions for it. And Lori, I'm going to jump to you first because we had a preview for this match and we kind of talked about our expectations for this squad, what we were expecting against Colombia. What were your initial reactions after the end of that match?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me about the lineup. At the end of the match, I felt like this is a team that hadn't played together in a couple months, and a lot of the players have come off like a big stretch of NWSL games and had practice, I think it was twice with one another. So working through some different situations on the field that were presented by a really tough Colombia team whose goalkeeper should get a major shout out. She was awesome. And I think these are the issues, or not issues, but these are the complexities of the game that we expect to see, I think, throughout qualifying. And it was a good test for the U.S. to see a little bit of two different halves and what could be presented throughout qualifying to them.
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge game, and you talk about that goalkeeping from Perez. Fantastic. Danielle, you were there. You were an analyst watching this game from the studio. Starting lineups, your reactions to this game. Tell us a little bit of what you thought when you saw this.
I would say my initial reactions when I saw the starting 11 was it was an interesting mix of veteran and youth. I think that's important as the U.S. heads towards qualifying and as they still, I would say, quite frankly, continue to transition. I think there is certainly an eye towards the youth. Vlatko has brought in younger players, is willing to take some risks on them and get some minutes, but also has a core handful of veteran players who are not only in camp, but are getting a starting role. I mean, you think of Becky Sauerbrunn, Kelly O'Hara specifically, really sitting in there to anchor and lead the back line alongside Alana Cook and Emily Fox ahead of Casey Murphy. So I think you have those two veteran players really in there to provide that anchor and that stability. And then you have like the next level, I would say, or the next wave of veterans and Rose Lavelle and Lindsey Horan, who really this could potentially be their team. They will be the key leaders on the pitch potentially come 2023. So getting them some minutes. But you got to think that the big story on the night was Ashley Hatch getting the starting nod, particularly because Alex Morgan has been in camp and been playing so well, scoring, I don't know, dozens and dozens of NWSL goals. So I think this was a big opportunity for her. And that was probably the most noteworthy surprise, I guess I would say, of the starting 11.
Yeah, I think that people were also looking for maybe a quicker start, and it just didn't happen in this game. I mean, it took nearly an hour for the team to find their breakthrough against Colombia. And I know in our preview of this game, we chatted a lot and tried to highlight a little bit about that middle third of the pitch and sort of curious if things were going to be clogged up there a little bit or some things were going to cancel each other out. So I think maybe going into the next game, I would maybe like to see some adjustments to sort of utilize the wide spaces a little bit more. I'm curious if maybe we're going to see the type of, I know there will be rotation, so I'm curious to see the type of rotation that we're going to see maybe on the wings and at those kind of fullback positions. And I think we need to see a little bit more of Kristie Mewis in the six.
Yes.
This was a little bit of a new pleasant surprise, I guess we'll label it, that we all got to see in this game. So we'll see.
Yeah, this was huge, Sandra. Kristie Mewis rotated into this game around the 70th minute, 72nd minute, and Mewis subs in for Andi Sullivan. That's also when we saw Taylor Korniak get her first cap with the United States women's national team. Let's talk about it. We've got to talk about this midfield trio. It was Rose Lavelle, Lindsey Horan, and Andi Sullivan to start. No surprises there, at least from our end. But then when you see Kristie Mewis being rotated in, Danielle, what were your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think the reality is probably that's the least deep position that the United States has, right? So I still think there's some experimentation going on, right? Like, I mean, I forget exactly when it was where Lindsey Horan was playing back there. I mean, when Julie Ertz went down, who, by the way, was like in that position, and there was no depth because she was such a rock solid force in there, that I think that was a big learning lesson for Vlatko over the course of the last couple of years of, oh my goodness, what happens if someone goes down in that position? And they're still, I think, continuing to experiment there. I'm not sure it's her best position. I think that it's good to see her there, but I want to see her there a little bit more. And I do think it's important for Vlatko to continue to figure out what that depth is going to look like in that role, because Julie Ertz may or may not be back and in top form a year from now. And if, God forbid, something happens to Andy Sullivan, what's the next situation? Is it Christy Mewis? Is it, gosh, I don't know, Lindsey Horan back there? I'm not sure. I mean, is it Taylor Korniak back there? Like, who the heck knows could fit into that role? So I still have a lot of questions. Great for Christy Mewis to get some minutes, but I don't feel like this Colombia side at that point in the game when she came into the match answered a lot of things for me. It was good for her to get some experience, but I'm not sure that that I'm convinced that that's the new role for her and the best place for her.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Dia. I think just the way the game was going, I do think we saw some of the things. I love this conversation because it's one that we've talked a lot about on here before. And just in terms of like, if you don't have a ton of depth as a true six that you're bringing in, then how do you manipulate other players around within the way that you're playing the game, right? We've talked about actually Christy Mewis and Taylor Korniak being an 8 position, right? At times will they drop deeper? At times, depending on the opponent, will they push forward higher? And we've actually seen Christy Mewis do that more so, I would say, with Houston in the past years, and we've seen her do that with Gotham. And she could play make, and we saw that in this game. But defensively, and the way that she screens the back line. A lot of those questions, to your point, Dee, I don't think were answered against this Colombia team, but it'll be interesting going forward. I'll just be curious to see, gets to what opponent then do things shift. And if Andy Sullivan is in there, by the way, who I actually thought had a really good game in terms of her positioning. We didn't see her on the ball as much in terms of possession, but I think in terms of her getting herself into positions, regaining the ball when it's turned over, I think she does that one of the best in the NWSL. We see how important she is with Washington Spirit, and I thought she was good the other night before she came out as well. So it'll be interesting. I agree with you.
Yeah, Andy Sullivan was one of my players heading into this match that I wanted to have a huge game. I wanted her to solidify her role there, defensively be on lock. And I agree. I think she did that in the moments that she was given, being able to switch the point of attack and draw defenders in and then open up the space for Horan and Lavelle ahead of her. We also talked about other players that we wanted to see have a big game. Sandra, for you, it was some of the center back actions. You wanted to see these center backs getting assists, but defensively, Sandra, when you looked at this match, obviously not so much pressure on the U.S., but what did you take of their back starting four? We saw Kelly O'Hara get extended minutes, which we haven't seen at the club level. So what did you think of that back four?
You know what, I was fine with it in terms of seeing them get a run out. I know when we did the preview, I mentioned that players like Kelly O'Hara and Becky Sauerbrunn were players that kind of started off the regular season, kind of building on their minutes, kind of dealing with some lower body injuries there, and kind of stacking them up as they went. So now these next pair of friendlies were going to be the little bit of the final prep that they would get to sort of get re-familiar with get reintegrated with this national team, but not just reintegrated with the national team, but newer faces that are on that back line. So I was very happy to see this sort of center back pairing of Sauerbrunn alongside Alana Cook, who has really sort of emerged very rapidly as this sort of newer, more consistent face in the center back position for the United States women's national team. We talked a lot about how things like whether it's been pregnancy or unfortunate injuries that have come up during 2022 that have kind of shaped this roster. And Alana Cook, I think defensively more than anybody, has been a little bit more of that consistent presence for this team. So I was really eager to see how that pairing would look between Sauerbrunn and Alana Cook, because I think they're two players who can kind of function a little bit similarly, both very patient, both with great vision of the pitch, can read a play 1-2 plays ahead, and really kind of rely on things positionally more than actual, speed to get behind a ball or try to recover and run things down. But I liked the pairing between the two of them. I thought that they switched off pretty well from time to time. And I think in terms of making the adjustments into that second half, on the fullback, we saw Huerta come in, for O'Hara. I really liked that switch as well. I think it was something that they targeted automatically and saw, okay, there's things that are not working here in terms of the timing. They were missing the final pass a little bit there. It sort of felt like at times during that first half, and sort of seeing things get kind of pinched up a little bit in that middle third. I think knowing that they had to continue to rely on a Fox or on a Huerta to try to help spread things out and open things up a little bit, I thought was really good as well. So I'm hopeful that going into this next game against Colombia, we sort of see a little bit more things ironed out there. Maybe we get a little bit more extended minutes for Huerta, or perhaps we even see somebody like a Naomi Girma get some minutes in the mix as well.
Yeah, I think before we even look ahead to that match, it's so important to take what we can and learn from this initial one, right? I mean, the first half scoreless. Opportunities were there for the U.S. I want to talk about this front line, where the spaces were, where the United States wasn't occupying, kind of what we saw from Colombia defensively and how they were able to play well. Lori, when you looked at the front line of Smith, Pugh, and Hatch being in there, not Alex Morgan, that change, where did they struggle in the first 45 minutes to find the back of the net, frankly, as basic as I can make that question in a sense, but like, especially with that front three and where the spaces were?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think just execution really in the tempo. We saw that, just getting on the same page, making sure that you're playing at a quick enough tempo, because, the reality is with Colombia, yes, they did play with the sweeper, but as Danielle even talked about it in studio at halftime too, that sweeper was pushing up. It was more of like a flat back five. I thought they did a really good job of, once the ball did get deep into the final third, then they converged centrally, right? So there's a ton of numbers in the box, making it difficult for to bypass at least the first line of defense when you're trying to cut the ball back. However, I do still think, I think sometimes we think when somebody plays a back five, we think of them playing as this low block. And I don't actually think that was the case. I think they stepped well. I thought they tried to push out. So it was some space in behind. I mean, you even go back and watch the game. There's times when Lindsey Herrera's making a run late in the first half from deep in the midfield, getting on a header. That was an opportunity on goal. So I think the thing is, with Macario, her movement is so sophisticated, right? She can drop back and she can play a 10 as well, but she can also threaten in behind. And it's just going to take time with Ashley Hatch, because this game is very different than the NWSL. So just understanding where the movements are. But I think one thing that in particular for Ashley Hatch is just continuing to threaten in behind, because even if you're not going to get that ball, then it opens up space underneath for a player like Haran, Rose Lavelle, and that's where it was most tight. And because somebody's checking back, Ashley Hatch wanted to check back, then you just condense that area even more. So I think those are the little things. I mean, I think, obviously Sophia Smith scoring the 2 goals. Mal Pugh could have been on early if she would have taken it with her left foot. Still a ton of opportunities, right? I mean, in the first half, that could have been 2-0 and the game looks very different. So there's still threatening in behind, on goal and options. I just think right now it's just going to take some time getting used to who's ever playing up there, or particularly that number 9, and just understanding the movements that are going to be most impactful to open up space depending on what the opposition is giving you.
I love all of those takes. We have to talk about it, though. 2 penalty kicks given to the United States throughout this game. Danielle, both of them were saved. Huge shout out to Catalina Perez, the goalkeeper for Colombia. Incredible job by her. But on those 2 penalty kicks, what did you see on the fouls and on the kicks? Was it the kicker's mistake? Was it great goaltending? What are your thoughts on those 2 PKs?
So I think they were fine calls. I'm okay with the calls. I was actually sitting next to Melissa Ortiz, and she was like, "No way!" It's like, you so wrong.
It was.
So I'm okay with the decisions by the referee. What was funny though? I'm thinking back to calling the Women's World Cup and VAR. credit goes to Catalina. Like I absolutely want to give her credit, but she was off her line, and that would have been a yellow card and a redo. It would have been on both of the penalty kicks, right? I mean, she's not off by much, but like with how tight, I was remembering how tight they were calling that at the World Cup. I was like, that's yellow. Like, and if she did it again,
she was off on both of them. She was off on both.
Yeah, I mean, just by a hair, like a foot. I mean, not a ton, but with VAR and that, like, so I'll be interested to see how that continues to evolve. I think the World Cup was kind of a nightmare scenario, and that they were using VAR for the first time, and everyone was learning, and they were calling it far too tightly. But I did notice that. Credit goes to her, though. I mean, I thought the penalty kick that Rose Lavelle took was a savable height, if you will. It was off the ground, so it looks sexy and awesome. And she read it well both times. But I think the United States doesn't like converts on their PKs. They do, and I thought it was just interesting to see when you don't have a Megan Rapinoe in the game in particular, like who is that next person? How are they thinking about who's number 2, number 3, number 4 in the lineup? So that was just kind of those thoughts popped into my head, I think, in all of those scenarios.
So it's 2 former players on the national team, Lori and Danielle. We got this question on Twitter, actually. How do they decide? Is it the player's choice on the pitch? Is it chosen beforehand? Who decides who takes these penalty kicks?
What was it for you, Lori?
Yeah, typically it was like, listen, you're taking these when you're leading up to qualifiers or some big tournament, you're taking these quite often, right? And for typically you'd have 2 players that were, hey, these are going to be the players who are going to take it in the run of play if something happens. And it ultimately was just up to the player's decision who wanted it, who felt the most confident, and they would step up and take it.
Yeah.
The same deal.
It was, I mean, I think for us, when I think back to at least senior level national team, it was always a discussion, or it wasn't discussion. It was always announced in the pregame talk, right? Like, and it was maybe 1, 2, 3, knowing like, okay, good. If the first person for some reason didn't want it or wasn't in the game, then it would go to the second person, go to the third person. So to me, it was a coach's decision, but the conversation and the training and all of that happened. So it wasn't like it was, oh, Sandra, you get a PK today.
No, you.
Okay, like it wasn't like that. It was prepared for, it was trained for it, the conversation was had, but ultimately I think it was a coach's decision.
And it comes from a bit of player confidence as well in the moment, who's like, yeah, I want this one, right? Like there, you have that adrenaline and you have the confidence and the momentum of a game as a player as you're heading into those types of situations. But the game changed in the second half. It opened up a lot for the U.S. We've got to talk about the 2 substitutes that came on. Alex Morgan subbed on for Ashley Hatch in the center striker position, and Ashley Sanchez in for Lindsey Herrera. Ashley Sanchez, holy cow, what a game from her. Sandra, I know we talked about this a little, you and me, but when Sanchez stepped on the pitch, things opened for her and she was dancing on the ball. Is that what you expected to see when Sanchez steps on like that?
Yeah, 100%. I think having her available off the bench was huge in a match like this, where the team sort of struggled a little bit to find that finishing pass or that extra pass in the final third. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that, quite frankly, this was first game back for a lot of these players in combination with some newer faces in the mix. It was going to take them a little bit of time, and we're not going to show any disrespect to Colombia. I mean, they were going to come out there and put together a good game plan against the United States. And I think we sort of saw that play out in the first half. So to sort of see the adjustments made, I think you see something like a Morgan coming on for Hatch, and that's a little bit of a like for like in terms of things positionally. But having Herrera come on for Sanchez, I think fit a number of things. I mean, for one, we're seeing Lindsey Herrera go out there and still playing with a really taped up knee. I think there's a lot of question marks there around Herrera right now, and I think that she's a player that you want to have at your disposal going through this qualifier. She's a really, really important player to this team right now, especially in light of missing, some other players, who are out, whether it's an Ertz or a Macario, et cetera. And I think it comes down to who do you want to see higher in that midfield. Mm-hmm. You do want to see somebody like a Herrera a little bit higher instead of relegated to a lower role. And then seeing someone like a Sanchez, you're going to want to have that opportunity as well. So it wasn't too shocking to sort of see Sanchez come on and kind of help open things up a little bit. I think that was going to be a natural transgression for the second half. I think you have a player like Morgan who automatically attracts multiple defenders and just opens things up there naturally, only to have a player of Sanchez and her ability to come in and be able to take advantage of maybe some of that extra space that opens up because of Morgan's presence in the box there. But I mean, we saw it immediately, that shot off the post, just sort of letting Colombia know, like, hey, things are going to look different in this second half.
This is entirely true. It changed everything. So we got 2 goals from Sophia Smith and then a goal from Taylor Korniak. She gets her first cap with the U.S. team and her first goal. Lori, you've got a big smile on your face. What is it about Taylor Korniak? Were you expecting this from her? Is this a turn of the page for her in the midfield and for the U.S. if they can establish a little bit of depth with Korniak in that trio?
Oh, well, it's awesome for players, to get this opportunity, your first cap, one of your first touches, you're getting in there and you're getting in the mix. And, I think the fun part about the Taylor Korniak is we've talked also about, her progression, right? Coming from Orlando, what that looked like and how they utilized her, how she's found a home in San Diego, and been able to utilize her strengths that are outside of just her ability in the air. And that's been a lot of the talking point, is like her ability to be able to play a final pass combined with Alex Morgan. And then, the afterthought is kind of like, yes, and also she's good in the air, right? And then we see that her score off of a header. I mean, it's awesome. You saw the celebration. I think the interesting thing in coupling Ashley Sanchez into this is that, to me, there is a variety of midfielders that have been called in that look very different, right? Herrera to Mewis to Andy Sullivan to Sanchez to Korniak to Roosevelt. They all have different qualities, which I think are important going into a tournament like qualifying, because then you see how Sanchez comes off the bench, right? And gives the team a different spark. She's quick in little areas, can play the final pass, can also shoot from distance, right? So, and then you have Taylor Korniak, some different capabilities on the ball, but a threat in the air as well on set pieces that gives the U.S. a different look. So to your point about Korniak, yeah, it's awesome. I think she gives them a different wrinkle for sure. And but I think all of these players do. And it kind of goes back to the overarching theme, in my opinion, is there does seem to be a good balance. And it's just about getting the pieces right and exactly getting the connectivity of exactly what Vlatko wants and what does that look like, right? And, Sandra had spoke earlier too about the width. Yes, this team was pretty narrow in this game. So who's responsible for providing the width when you do have 3 narrow forwards, right? That would probably be the outside backs, in my opinion. So just getting those little details correct so that the fluidity and the talent of these players is coming out on a more consistent basis to be able to play at a higher tempo and start to kind of pull teams apart in a quicker way, right? Earlier on in the game.